The sound of another bottle shattering against the wall had become so familiar that Laura Thompson no longer flinched when her husband threw them. She stood at the stove in their ramshackle house on the outskirts of Carson City, Nevada, stirring beans that would likely be cold before Raymond sobered up enough to eat them. It was 1878, and at 24 years old, Laura had already lived a lifetime of disappointments. The dreams she had carried from Missouri as a hopeful bride 5 years earlier lay shattered like the glass fragments scattered across the wooden floor, sharp reminders of promises broken and a future that would never arrive. Raymond stumbled through the doorway, reeking of whiskey and the stale smoke from whatever saloon had tolerated him that afternoon. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes stained, and his voice slurred as he demanded to know why supper was not already on the table. Laura set down her wooden spoon with deliberate slowness, her movements mechanical after years of this same routine. She had learned long ago not to argue, not to cry, not to show any emotion that might fuel his anger or, worse, his mocking laughter. "It will be ready in a moment," she said quietly, her voice flat and empty of inflection. "Always with the excuses," Raymond muttered, dropping into his chair with such force that it scraped loudly against the floor. "My mother warned me about women like you, pretty faces hiding lazy hearts." Laura said nothing. There was nothing to say anymore. She had stopped defending herself 2 years into their marriage when she realized that Raymond heard only what he wanted to hear, saw only what he wanted to see. The man she had married or thought she had married had never really existed. He had been a performance, a role played long enough to get her to the altar and away from her family in Missouri. Now she was trapped in Nevada with a drunk who spent every cent they had on rot-gut whiskey while she took in washing and mending just to keep food on the table. She placed the bowl of beans in front of him and watched as he ate sloppily, complaining between mouthfuls. Her own appetite had disappeared months ago. She survived on coffee and whatever scraps remained, growing thinner and paler with each passing season. Her reflection in the cracked mirror above the wash basin showed a woman who looked far older than her years, with hollow cheeks and eyes that held no spark, no hope, no dreams left to chase. That night, after Raymond passed out in their bed, Laura sat by the window and looked out at the vast Nevada sky scattered with stars. She remembered being a girl of 16, reading books about adventure and romance, imagining a life filled with purpose and love. She had dreamed of having children, of building something meaningful, of mattering to someone. Now those dreams seemed like cruel jokes, fantasies that had led her down a path to this miserable existence. The next morning began like every other. Raymond left before dawn without a word, heading to wherever men like him went to drink away the daylight hours. Laura built up the fire, heated water for washing, and began scrubbing the clothes she had collected from the boarding house on Main Street. Her hands were red and raw, her back ached from bending over the washboard, but the work kept her fed and gave her something to do besides contemplate the emptiness of her life. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Living on the edge of town meant visitors were rare, and her first instinct was worry. Raymond owed money to half the merchants in Carson City, and she had learned to dread the arrival of creditors. But when she came around the side of the house, wiping her wet hands on her apron, she saw a man on horseback who did not look like a debt collector. He sat tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the morning sun, and led a second horse behind him. Even from a distance, Laura could see he carried himself differently than the men she usually encountered. There was a quiet confidence in the way he dismounted, moving with an easy grace that spoke of years spent in the saddle. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Morning, madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat politely. "I am looking for Raymond Thompson. I was told this is his place." Laura's stomach tightened. "What business do you have with my husband?" The man seemed to notice her tension because his expression softened slightly. "Nothing bad, I promise you. My name is Thomas Yates. I've got a proposition for him regarding some ranch work up north, paying work if he is interested." "He is not here," Laura said, crossing her arms over her chest. "I do not know when he will be back." Thomas nodded slowly, his gray eyes taking in the shabby house, the struggling garden, and Laura's worn dress. She felt suddenly self-conscious under his gaze, aware of how she must look with her hair coming loose from its bun and her apron stained with soap and dirt. "I see," he said carefully. "Well, maybe I could leave word with you. I am headed up to the Washoe Valley, working on a cattle ranch there. They are looking for hands, and I thought perhaps your husband might be interested. It is honest work with decent pay." Laura nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. Raymond had not done honest work in years, and the idea of him lasting even a day as a ranch hand was almost comical. But she held her tongue, simply shaking her head. "I will tell him you came by, Mr. Yates, but I would not count on him being interested." Thomas studied her for a moment longer, and Laura had the uncomfortable feeling that he saw far more than she wanted him to see. There was something in his eyes, a kindness mixed with understanding that made her want to turn away. She did not need pity from strangers. "Thank you for your time, madam," he said finally, putting his foot in the stirrup. But before he swung back into the saddle, he paused. "If you do not mind my saying so, you look like you could use some help around here. That fence is nearly falling down, and your roof has some shingles missing. If your husband is not interested in the ranch work, maybe he would let me do a few repairs in exchange for a meal. I am a fair hand with tools." "That is kind of you," Laura said stiffly, "but we do not need charity." "Was not offering charity," Thomas replied evenly. "Was offering a trade. I have been on the trail for 3 days, and a home-cooked meal would be worth more than gold right now." Despite herself, Laura felt something stir in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with such simple, genuine courtesy that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. She opened her mouth to refuse again, but different words came out. "I suppose I could make supper tonight. If you fix the fence posts out front, that would be trade enough." Thomas smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and changed his whole face. "That is a deal, madam. I will get started right away if you will point me toward any tools." Laura showed him to the small shed where Raymond kept what few tools they owned, most of them rusted from disuse. As Thomas began working on the fence, she returned to her laundry, stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. He worked steadily and skillfully, clearly a man accustomed to physical labor. Unlike Raymond, who complained endlessly about the smallest tasks, Thomas simply did what needed doing without fanfare or fuss. By mid-afternoon, the fence was repaired. Several loose shingles were secured back onto the roof, and Thomas had even fixed the broken step on the front porch that Laura had been carefully avoiding for months. She felt a strange mixture of gratitude and embarrassment watching him work. It made painfully clear how little Raymond cared for their home or her. "I will start on supper," she called out, her voice sounding too loud in the quiet afternoon. "Much obliged," Thomas replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "I will water the horses and clean up a bit." Laura went inside and began preparing the best meal she could manage with what she had. She used some of the precious flour she had been saving to make biscuits, opened a jar of preserves she had put up the previous summer, and fried salt pork with potatoes and onions. It was humble fare, but she took care with it in a way she had not bothered with in months. As she worked, she heard Raymond returning, his unsteady footsteps recognizable even before he started shouting her name. Her whole body tensed, the brief lightness she had felt while cooking evaporating instantly. "Laura, where the hell are you? Whose horse is that outside?" She hurried to the door before he could work himself into a fury. "A man named Thomas Yates came by looking for you. He had a job offer, ranch work up in Washoe Valley. He did some repairs in trade for supper." Raymond pushed past her roughly, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Ranch work? I do not need some stranger telling me where to work, and who said you could invite people to my house?" "I thought you might be interested in hearing about the job," Laura said quietly, keeping her voice steady. "And the fence was falling down." "I will decide what needs fixing around here," Raymond snarled, but his attention was already drifting toward the kitchen and the smell of food cooking. "Where is this man?" "Outside with the horses," Laura said. Raymond grunted and stumbled toward the kitchen table, sitting down heavily. "Well, tell him to get in here. If he wants to eat my food, he can at least be sociable about it." Laura found Thomas by the water trough, running wet hands through his hair to slick it back. He had removed his hat and vest, and his shirt was damp with sweat from the afternoon's work. "My husband is home," she said simply. "Supper is ready if you would like to come in." Something flickered across Thomas's face when she mentioned Raymond, but he nodded politely and followed her inside. The contrast between the two men was immediately apparent. Thomas stood straight and moved with purpose while Raymond slouched in his chair, already eyeing the whiskey bottle on the shelf. "Raymond Thompson." Thomas extended his hand. "Thomas Yates. I appreciate your wife letting me do some work around here. Place was needing a little attention." Raymond did not shake his hand, barely looking at him. "Laura says you have got some job offer." "That is right," Thomas said, withdrawing his hand without apparent offense. He sat down at Laura's gesture, waiting as she served the food. "I am working at the Sinclair Ranch up in Washoe Valley. Good outfit, fair bosses. They are looking for experienced hands. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board." $30, Raymond snorted. "That is slave wages." "It is honest wages for honest work," Thomas replied calmly. "And a sight better than what most men make around here, from what I have seen." "Is that so?" Raymond's voice took on a dangerous edge. "You have been around here long enough to know what men make, have you?" Laura set a plate in front of Thomas, then one in front of Raymond, her hands trembling slightly. She knew that tone, knew where this was heading. Raymond felt insulted, which meant he would drink more and get meaner. "Just making an observation," Thomas said mildly, his attention on his food. He took a bite of the biscuit and his eyebrows rose. "Madam, this is excellent. Best thing I have tasted in weeks." "Thank you," Laura murmured, taking her own seat but not touching her food. Raymond ate sloppily, talking with his mouth full. "I do not need ranch work. I've got prospects right here in Carson City. Big prospects." Thomas said nothing, just continued eating with obvious appreciation. Laura watched him covertly, noticing how he seemed entirely unruffled by Raymond's rudeness. Most men either got angry in return or became obsequious around her husband's aggression. Thomas simply remained calm and focused on his meal. "You hear me?" Raymond demanded. "I said I've got prospects." "I heard you," Thomas said. "That is good. Man needs prospects." "Damn right," Raymond muttered, reaching for the whiskey bottle. He poured himself a generous glass, not offering any to Thomas. "So you can take your ranch job and ride on out of here." "Fair enough," Thomas agreed. "I appreciate the meal and the company." He looked at Laura then, meeting her eyes directly. "Thank you, madam. This was far better than I deserved for a few hours of work." Laura felt her face flush. "You did good work," It was a fair trade. Raymond slammed his glass down. I will decide what is fair around here. Now you have eaten, so you can go. Thomas stood without argument, putting his hat back on. Much obliged for your hospitality. He nodded to Raymond, then to Laura. Madam. Laura walked him to the door, aware of Raymond watching them with bleary suspicion. Outside, in the fading daylight, Thomas paused by his horse. I am staying at the boarding house on Main Street for the next few days, he said quietly. If you need anything at all, you can send word there. Laura shook her head quickly. We are fine, but thank you. Thomas looked like he wanted to say more, but he simply touched his hat brim again and mounted his horse. Laura watched him ride away, feeling an odd sense of loss as he disappeared down the road. She returned inside to find Raymond finishing the whiskey. Do not think I did not see how you looked at him, Raymond said, his words slurring. Do not think I am fool enough to miss that. I did not look at him any particular way, Laura said, beginning to clear the table. He was just someone passing through. You better remember you are a married woman, Raymond continued, his eyes glazing over. You belong to me. Everything here belongs to me. Laura did not respond. There was no point. Raymond would continue drinking until he passed out, and by morning he would barely remember this conversation. She washed the dishes in silence, her mind replaying the afternoon despite her best efforts to push the thoughts away. That night, lying beside her unconscious husband, Laura stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about the kindness in Thomas Yates's gray eyes or the respectful way he had spoken to her. She tried not to compare his steady competence with Raymond's slovenly uselessness. She tried not to let herself imagine what life might be like with a different kind of man, but the thoughts came anyway, unwelcome and dangerous. Because allowing herself to dream again, even for a moment, was the cruelest thing she could do. Dreams led to hope, and hope led to disappointment. She had learned that lesson thoroughly. Better to accept what was and stop wishing for what could never be. The next 3 days passed in their usual dreary routine. Raymond came and went, always drunk or getting there. Laura took in more washing, mended clothes for the boarding house, and tried to scrape together enough money to buy flour and coffee. She did not see Thomas Yates again, and she told herself she was relieved about that. Then, on the 4th morning, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Sheriff Dawson standing on her porch, hat in hand, his weathered face somber. "Morning, Mrs. Thompson," he said. "I'm afraid I've got some difficult news." Laura's heart began to pound. For one wild moment she thought something had happened to Thomas, which made no sense at all, but the sheriff was talking about Raymond. "There was an accident last night. Your husband got into a fight at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Things got heated and he pulled a knife. Other fellow had a gun. By the time I got there, Raymond was already gone. I am real sorry for your loss, madam." Laura stared at him, unable to process the words. Raymond was dead. Her husband was dead. She waited for the grief to hit, for tears to come, for some strong emotion to well up inside her. But there was nothing, just a strange, hollow numbness. "Madam, are you all right? Maybe you should sit down." "I am fine," Laura heard herself say. "What happens now?" Sheriff Dawson looked uncomfortable. "Well, we will need you to identify the body, and there is the matter of his debts." Raymond owed money to quite a few folks around town. As his widow, that becomes your responsibility. Of course it did. Even in death, Raymond would find a way to make her life harder. How much? The sheriff pulled out a small notebook and flipped through it. "Near as I can figure, about $200. Maybe more. Folks keep coming forward. $200. It might as well have been $2,000. Laura barely made $20 a month with all her washing and mending combined. Even if she gave every cent to creditors, It would take her nearly a year to pay off Raymond's debts, and that was assuming she could somehow live on air alone. "I see," she said quietly. "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff." After he left, Laura sat in the kitchen and tried to feel anything about her husband's death. But there was only relief, and that made her feel guilty. No woman should be relieved that her husband was dead, no matter how miserable he had made her. Yet she could not deny the small, shameful flutter of something that felt almost like freedom. The funeral was quick and poorly attended. Laura wore the black dress she had brought from Missouri, altered now to fit her thinner frame. A few townspeople came out of obligation, offering hollow condolences that she accepted with nods and murmured thanks. She stood by the grave in the hot sun and listened to the preacher say words about a man he had never known, painting Raymond as a decent soul taken too soon. After everyone left, Laura remained at the graveside for a few more minutes, not out of sentiment but because she did not know where else to go. Her life stretched ahead of her now, blank and uncertain. She was a widow at 24, saddled with debt, with no family nearby and no prospects beyond washing other people's clothes. "Madam?" Laura turned to find Thomas Yates standing a respectful distance away, hat in his hands. He looked uncomfortable, as though uncertain whether he should have come. "Mr. Yates," she said, surprised, "I did not see you at the service." "I stayed in the back," he said. "Did not want to intrude. I only heard about what happened yesterday. I am real sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Laura said automatically, the words meaningless from repetition. Thomas shifted his weight, clearly wanting to say more but struggling with how. "If you do not mind my asking, what are your plans now?" Laura laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Plans? I have got debts to pay and no way to pay them except to keep taking in washing until I am old and gray. Those are my plans. What about family? People you could go to?" "My parents are dead. I have got a sister in Missouri, but I have not heard from her in 3 years. I doubt she would want me showing up on her doorstep as a penniless widow." Laura heard the bitterness in her own voice and tried to soften it. "I will manage. I always do." Thomas was quiet for a moment, looking out over the cemetery. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. "I am leaving for Washoe Valley tomorrow. The job offer I mentioned to your husband, it is still available. The ranch needs a cook as well as hands. The pay is not much, maybe $20 a month, but it includes room and board. If you are interested, I could put in a word for you with the Sinclairs." Laura stared at him. "Why would you do that? You do not know me." "I know you are in a tough spot," Thomas said simply. "And I know you are a good cook and a hard worker. That is enough. Besides, seems to me Carson City does not hold much for you now except hard memories and debt collectors." He was right, of course. The idea of staying in this town, in that house, paying off Raymond's debts for the next year while slowly starving, made her want to scream. But accepting help from a near stranger, leaving everything familiar, heading off to work on some ranch in Washoe Valley, that terrified her in a different way. "I would need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course," Thomas agreed. "I am leaving at sunrise tomorrow. If you decide you want to come, meet me at the north end of Main Street. If not, I understand. Either way, I wish you the best, Mrs. Thompson." He settled his hat back on his head and walked away, leaving Laura standing alone among the graves. She watched him go, her mind racing. This was impossible. She could not just leave town with a man she barely knew, heading to a place she had never been to take a job she was not even certain she could do. It was reckless and improper and probably dangerous. But as she walked back to the empty house, climbing the porch steps that Thomas had repaired, opening the door to rooms that smelled of whiskey and failure, Laura felt something she had not felt in 5 long years. A flicker of possibility. a tiny spark that might, if she was very careful and very brave, grow into something like hope. She spent the night sorting through her meager possessions, trying to decide what was worth keeping. The furniture had never really been hers, and most of it was falling apart anyway. Her clothes fit into a single carpet bag. She had a few books, her mother's wedding ring, and a small tin of money she had hidden from Raymond, containing the grand sum of $12. As dawn approached, Laura made her decision. She left a note for the landlord, explaining that he could sell whatever he wanted from the house to help pay Raymond's debts. She doubted it would make much difference, but at least she would not be leaving without making some attempt at restitution. Then she picked up her carpet bag, took one last look around the house that had been her prison for 5 years, and walked out without a backward glance. The sun was just starting to paint the eastern sky pink when Laura reached the north end of Main Street. Thomas was there as promised with his 2 horses packed and ready. When he saw her approaching, his face broke into a genuine smile. "I am glad you came," he said, and Laura believed him. "I do not have much," she said, indicating her single bag. "That makes 2 of us," Thomas replied. He helped her secure her bag to one of the horses, then gave her a boost into the saddle. "You ever ridden much?" "Not in years," Laura admitted, "but I imagine it will come back to me." They rode out of Carson City as the town began to wake up, heading north into the Nevada morning. Laura did not look back. There was nothing behind her worth seeing. Ahead, the landscape spread out in shades of sage and gold, vast and open and full of unknowns. For the first time in years, Laura felt like she could breathe. The journey to Washoe Valley took 3 days. Thomas set an easy pace, mindful of Laura's lack of recent riding experience. They stopped frequently to rest the horses and eat simple meals of hardtack, dried meat, and whatever they could forage. At night, Thomas insisted that Laura take his bedroll while he slept on a blanket under the stars, maintaining a respectful distance that helped ease Laura's concerns about the propriety of traveling alone with a man. During those 3 days, they talked. At first, the conversation was stilted and careful, both of them feeling out the boundaries of this strange new arrangement. But gradually, as miles passed beneath the horses' hooves, Laura found herself opening up in ways she had not done in years. "What made you come out west?" she asked on the second day as they rested beside a small creek. Thomas considered the question while refilling their canteens. "My father had a farm in Ohio. Good land, but 6 sons to divide it between. I was the youngest, so my prospects were pretty limited. When I was 19, I decided to head west and make my own way. That was 8 years ago now. Do you miss it, Ohio?" "Sometimes," Thomas admitted. "I miss my mother's cooking and my brother's company, but I do not miss feeling like a spare part, you know. Out here, a man is judged by what he can do, not what he was born into." Laura understood that better than she could say. In Missouri, she had been the daughter of a failed shopkeeper, considered beneath most of the town's marriageable men. Raymond had seemed like her only chance at something better, but that had proven to be a cruel illusion. "What about you?" Thomas asked. "How did you end up in Carson City?" Laura hesitated, old shame and newer resentment warring inside her. But something about the way Thomas asked, genuinely interested without a trace of judgment, made her want to tell the truth. "I was young and stupid," she said flatly. "Raymond came through my town in Missouri with stories about silver strikes and opportunities in Nevada. He was charming when he wanted to be, and I was desperate to get away from home. My father had died owing money, and my mother and I were living with my aunt, who made sure we knew every day what a burden we were. When Raymond asked me to marry him and come west, I said yes without thinking it through. How old were you?" 19. "Old enough to know better, but I did not." Laura picked up a smooth stone and tossed it into the creek. By the time we got to Nevada, he had already started drinking heavily. I kept thinking it would get better, that he would settle down and become the man he pretended to be when we were courting. But people do not change. They just become more of what they already are. That was not your fault, Thomas said quietly. He lied to you. He took advantage of a young woman in a tough situation. That is on him, not you. Laura felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. No one had ever said that to her before. Everyone in Carson City had looked at her with pity or contempt, as if Raymond's failures were somehow hers as well. "Thank you for saying that," she managed. They rode on in comfortable silence for a while. Laura found herself watching Thomas when she thought he was not paying attention. He had an easy competence about him, whether he was setting up camp, tending the horses, or navigating the trail. More than that, he treated her with a consistent respect that she had almost forgotten was possible. He listened when she spoke, asked her opinion on things, and never once made her feel stupid or lesser. On the third night, they camped in a small valley with good grass for the horses and a clear stream nearby. Thomas built a fire while Laura unpacked their provisions. The routine they had developed over the past days felt natural now, each of them knowing their role without discussion. "We should reach the Sinclair Ranch by mid-afternoon tomorrow," Thomas said as they ate. "Mr. Sinclair is a fair man, bit gruff maybe, but straight dealing. His wife Ruth runs the household, and she is the one who mentioned needing a cook. Their last one left to get married about a month ago." "What if they do not like me?" Laura asked, voicing the fear that had been growing as they got closer to their destination. "What if I am not good enough?" Thomas looked at her seriously. "You will be fine. You are good at what you do and you work hard. That is what matters." "But Laura, I need you to understand something. I told the Sinclairs you were a widow looking for work, which is true. But if this does not work out, if you do not like it there or they do not need you after all, I will make sure you have money to get somewhere else. You are not trapped." "You understand?" Laura nodded, moved by his concern. "Why are you being so kind to me? Really?" Thomas poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks rise into the night sky. "When I first saw you in Carson City, standing by that wash line looking like all the life had been beaten out of you, it reminded me of my sister. She married a mean drunk too, back in Ohio. By the time my brothers and I realized how bad things were and went to get her, she had given up. She did not believe she deserved better or that anything could change. She died 2 years later, just sort of faded away even though she was not yet 30. He looked up at Laura, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "I could not help her, but maybe I could help you. Maybe that is selfish, trying to make up for what I failed to do for Hannah, but there it is." Laura felt tears prick her eyes, the first real tears she had cried in years. "I am sorry about your sister." "Me too," Thomas said quietly. "She was a good person who deserved better than what she got. Just like you." That night, Laura lay in the bedroll and stared up at the vast expanse of stars above. She thought about Hannah Yates, a woman she would never meet but who had somehow changed her life. She thought about Raymond and the years she had wasted believing she deserved the misery he dealt her. And she thought about Thomas, this unexpected man who had appeared in her life at exactly the right moment, offering her not salvation but a chance, a choice, a possibility of something different. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled. The horses shifted and stamped, and Laura felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, something she barely recognized after so long without it. Hope. They reached the Sinclair Ranch the next afternoon as promised. It was a substantial spread with a well-built ranch house, several outbuildings and extensive corrals. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and Laura could see several men working near the barns. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, which eased some of her nervousness. A woman emerged from the house as they rode up, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 45, with graying brown hair and the sturdy build of someone accustomed to hard work. Her expression was assessing but not unfriendly. "Thomas Yates, back from your wandering," she called out. "Mr. Sinclair said you would be along soon." "Mrs. Sinclair." Thomas dismounted and helped Laura down from her horse. "This is Mrs. Laura Thompson, the widow I mentioned in my letter. Laura, this is Ruth Sinclair." Ruth's sharp eyes took in Laura's worn dress, her thin frame, and the wariness in her posture. "Welcome to the Sinclair Ranch, Mrs. Thompson. Thomas wrote that you might be interested in the cook position." "Yes, madam," Laura said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I would be grateful for the opportunity." "Well, let's not stand here in the yard talking about it. Come inside and we will discuss terms over coffee." Ruth turned toward the house, clearly expecting them to follow. The ranch house was spacious and clean, furnished simply but comfortably. Ruth led them to a large kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a generous work table, and shelves lined with supplies. It was the kind of kitchen Laura had dreamed of having, well-equipped and organized. "Sit," Ruth commanded, already pouring coffee from a pot on the stove. "Thomas, you can put Mrs. Thompson's bag in the small room off the kitchen. That is where our last cook stayed." While Thomas was gone, Ruth sat down across from Laura and studied her frankly. "I will be straight with you, Mrs. Thompson. I need someone who can cook 3 solid meals a day for anywhere from 8 to 15 men, depending on the season. Someone who can manage supplies, keep the kitchen clean, and not fall apart when things get hectic. In return, I will pay you $20 a month, plus room and board. You will get 1 full day off per week and Sunday afternoons. The work is hard, but I treat people fairly. What do you say?" Laura felt dizzy with relief. It was more than she had hoped for, better than she had dared imagine. "I say yes, madam. Thank you." "Good," Ruth said, her stern face softening slightly. "Now, I will be honest. Thomas told me a bit about your situation, about your husband. I do not hold with gossip, and what happened in your past is your business. But I need to know you are here to work and not to cause drama with my ranch hands. I run a respectable operation." "I understand," Laura said. "I am here to work, that is all." Ruth nodded, satisfied. "Then we will get along fine. You can start tomorrow morning. Breakfast is at 5:30, dinner at noon, supper at 6:30. Tonight you are a guest. Rest up and get your bearings." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Laura threw herself into her new job with determination born of both necessity and genuine interest. Cooking for the ranch hands was challenging work, requiring her to prepare large quantities of simple, hearty food that could sustain men engaged in physical labor. She woke before dawn to get biscuits in the oven and coffee brewing, spent her days managing soups and roasts and pies, and fell into bed each night exhausted but satisfied. The ranch hands were initially skeptical of the thin, quiet widow who had appeared to cook for them, but Laura quickly won them over with her competence and consistency. She learned their preferences, remembered who liked extra gravy and who could not tolerate onions, and made sure there was always plenty of hot coffee available. The men began to relax around her, offering polite greetings and occasional compliments about the food. Thomas worked alongside the other hands, breaking horses and mending fences, and doing all the hard physical labor required to keep the ranch running. Laura saw him mainly at mealtimes, when he would file through the kitchen with the others, always offering a quiet word of thanks. She tried not to single him out, aware that Ruth was watching to ensure there was no impropriety, but she found herself looking for him nonetheless. One evening, About 3 weeks after her arrival, Laura was cleaning up after supper when Ruth came into the kitchen and sat down at the work table. "You are doing good work," Ruth said without preamble. "The men are satisfied and I have not had to redo anything you have done. I appreciate that." "Thank you, madam," Laura said, pleased by the praise. "I also wanted to tell you that I have noticed Thomas Yates has been taking his meals separately from the other hands lately." Ruth's voice was neutral, but Laura felt her stomach clench. "He eats fast and then heads back outside. You know anything about that?" Laura shook her head honestly. "No, madam. I have not spoken to him beyond normal pleasantries." Ruth said. "Well, it seems to me that young man might be trying to avoid temptation. He is a good worker and an honorable sort. I would hate to see either of you put in a difficult position." Laura understood what Ruth was really saying. The widow and the bachelor needed to be careful about appearances, about propriety. It made sense, but it also made Laura's heart sink. She had not realized until that moment how much she had been looking forward to those brief exchanges with Thomas, how much his steady presence had come to mean to her. "I understand, madam," Laura said quietly. "I am sure you do," Ruth replied, standing. "You are a sensible woman, Mrs. Thompson." "Just wanted to make sure we were clear." After Ruth left, Laura finished her cleaning with mechanical efficiency, her thoughts churning. She had been foolish to let herself start caring about Thomas, even a little. She was a widow barely a month out from her husband's death, and Thomas was simply a kind man who had helped her out of a bad situation. Anything else was inappropriate and impossible. But knowing that did not stop her from thinking about him as she lay in her small room that night, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for sleep. The next Sunday was Laura's first full day off. She spent the morning doing small tasks in her room, mending her own clothes and writing a letter to her sister that she was not sure she would send. In the afternoon, feeling restless, she decided to take a walk around the ranch property. The day was beautiful, with a clear blue sky and a light breeze that made the heat bearable. Laura followed a path that led away from the main buildings, past the corrals and into an area of scattered trees near a small creek. She was enjoying the solitude when she heard the unmistakable sound of a horse approaching. Thomas rode up, looking surprised to see her. "Mrs. Thompson, I did not expect to find anyone out here." "It is my day off," Laura said, feeling suddenly defensive. "I was just taking a walk." "No, of course," Thomas said quickly, dismounting. "I did not mean anything by it. I was just checking on the fence line. Mind if I walk with you a bit?" Laura knew she should say no, should maintain the proper distance that Ruth had implied was necessary. But she found herself nodding instead. "I would like that." They walked in silence for a while, Thomas leading his horse. The awkwardness that had developed over the past weeks hung between them like a physical presence. "How are you settling in?" Thomas asked finally. "Are the Sinclairs treating you all right?" "Very well," Laura said. "Ruth is strict but fair and the work is hard but satisfying. I am grateful you brought me here." "I am glad it worked out," Thomas said. He sounded like he wanted to say more but was holding back. Laura stopped walking and turned to face him. "Thomas, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why have you been avoiding me? If I did something to offend you or make you uncomfortable, I am sorry." Thomas looked genuinely distressed. "No, Laura, you did not do anything wrong. I have been avoiding you because I needed to. Because every time I see you, every time you smile or laugh or just look happy, I want things I have got no right to want." Laura's breath caught. "What things?" "You know what things," Thomas said quietly, his gray eyes intense. "You are a widow barely a month out from your husband's death. It would not be right for me to say anything or do anything that might make you uncomfortable or compromise your position here. Ruth has been good to both of us, and I will not repay that by being inappropriate. What if I do not think it is inappropriate?" Laura heard herself say, her heart pounding. Thomas took a step closer, then stopped himself. "Laura, I have been thinking about you since the first day I saw you in Carson City, standing in that yard looking so lost. I have been thinking about you every day since, wondering if you are all right, hoping you are happy, wanting to make you smile. But you deserve time to grieve, time to figure out who you are without being somebody's wife. You deserve to make choices without some man pushing you in a direction before you are ready." Laura felt tears sliding down her cheeks. What if I already know what I want? What if I have spent the last month feeling more alive than I have in 5 years, and it is because of you? What if I do not want to waste any more time being careful and proper, when I have already wasted so many years being miserable? Thomas closed the distance between them then, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. "Are you sure? Because once I start this, once I let myself care about you the way I want to, I will not be able to stop. And if you change your mind later, if you decide I am not what you want, that will be your right. But it will break me, Laura. It will absolutely break me. I am sure," Laura whispered. "I am more sure about this than I have been about anything in years." Thomas kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of restrained longing. Laura felt something inside her crack open, all the walls she had built around her heart crumbling. She had never been kissed like this, with such tenderness and care, as if she were something precious worth protecting. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were shaking slightly. Thomas rested his forehead against hers, his hand still cradling her face. "We will have to be careful," he said. "We cannot let anyone know about this yet, not until enough time has passed that it will not cause scandal. I will not have people talking about you or questioning your character." "I do not care what people think," Laura said, but she knew he was right. Her position at the ranch depended on maintaining respectability. "I know, but I care," Thomas replied. "You have worked too hard to build a new life here. I will not let my selfishness ruin that. We can wait, take things slow, do this right." They made their way back separately, mindful of watching eyes. But everything had changed, and Laura felt it in every breath she took. For the first time in years, she had something to look forward to, something worth fighting for. The next few months were an exercise in patience and discretion. Laura and Thomas stole moments together when they could, brief conversations in the barn or walks on her days off, always careful to maintain appearances. It was frustrating and exhilarating all at once. Laura felt like a young girl again, experiencing the rush of genuine affection for the first time. But they were not children, and the feelings between them ran deeper than mere infatuation. Laura found herself drawn to Thomas's quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, the way he treated everyone around him with respect and fairness. He made her laugh, something she had not done freely in years. He listened to her opinions and valued her thoughts. He made her feel seen and heard and valued. Thomas, for his part, seemed to treasure every minute they spent together. He told her about his dreams of someday having a ranch of his own, a small operation where he could raise horses and cattle and build something lasting. He talked about his family back in Ohio, the nieces and nephews he had never met. He asked about her childhood, her interests, what she wanted for her future. "I stopped thinking about my future years ago," Laura admitted one afternoon as they sat by the creek. "It hurt too much to want things I could never have." "And now?" Thomas asked, his hand finding hers. "Now I am starting to dream again," Laura said softly. "Small dreams at first, but they are there. I dream about having a home that is really mine, about maybe having children someday, about waking up next to someone who loves me and treats me well. Are those foolish dreams? Not foolish at all, Thomas said, bringing her hand to his lips. They are the best kind of dreams, and Laura, I want to give them to you, all of them, if you will let me. As summer turned to fall, Ruth Sinclair began to notice the change in Laura. It was impossible not to see how the sad, hollow-eyed widow had transformed into a woman who smiled easily and moved with new energy. One evening, she called Laura into her private sitting room. "Sit down, Mrs. Thompson," Ruth said, her expression unreadable. Laura sat, her stomach knotting with anxiety. Had someone seen her with Thomas? Was she about to lose everything she had built here? "I am not blind," Ruth said without preamble. "I have seen how you and Thomas Yates look at each other when you think no one is watching, and I have seen how hard you both try to be proper and respectful despite those feelings." Laura opened her mouth to defend herself, but Ruth held up a hand. "I am not finished. Your husband has been dead for 5 months now. By most standards, that is barely enough time for proper mourning, and certainly not enough time for a widow to be thinking about courting again. But I have also noticed that you do not wear black anymore, that you never speak of Mr. Thompson with anything resembling grief, and that you seem more alive now than you did when you first arrived here." Ruth leaned forward in her chair. "So I am going to ask you directly, and I want an honest answer. Did Raymond Thompson deserve your mourning? Did he earn your grief?" Laura felt tears spring to her eyes. "No, madam, he did not. He was cruel and drunk, and he made me miserable. I know I should not speak ill of the dead, but that is the truth. Then why in God's name are you denying yourself happiness because of him?" Ruth demanded. "That man took years of your life already. Are you going to let him take more from the grave?" Laura stared at her, hardly believing what she was hearing. Ruth's expression softened. "I had a husband before Mr. Sinclair. He died when I was 25, and I loved him so much I thought I would die too. But I did not die, and eventually I met William Sinclair. Some people in town thought it was too soon, that I should have waited longer. But I knew what I wanted, and I did not see the point in being miserable just to satisfy other people's sense of propriety." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the ranch. "Thomas Yates is a good man. He works hard, treats people fairly, and he clearly thinks the sun rises and sets with you. If you want to be with him, if he makes you happy, then do not let fear or propriety or what anyone else might think stop you. Life is too short and too hard to waste chances at happiness." Laura could not speak past the lump in her throat. She simply nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Now, that said," Ruth continued, turning back with a slight smile, "I expect you to maintain certain standards while you are under my roof. No sneaking around in the middle of the night. If you and Thomas want to court openly, you court openly. Come to dinner together on Sundays. Take walks where people can see you. Do this honestly or do not do it at all." "Yes, madam," Laura managed. Thank you so much." "Do not thank me," Ruth said briskly. "Just be happy. And keep making those apple pies the men like so much. That is thanks enough." That Sunday, Thomas and Laura sat together on the porch after dinner, in full view of anyone who cared to look. It felt bold and terrifying and absolutely right. Thomas held her hand openly, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Ruth says we can court properly now," Laura said, still hardly believing it. "She says life is too short to waste chances at happiness." "She is a wise woman," Thomas said, bringing Laura's hand to his lips. "And she is right. I have wasted enough time being careful. Laura Thompson, I would like to court you officially, with the intention of marrying you if you will have me." Laura felt her heart swell. "That is a big if. You might find out I am terrible company once you spend more time with me." "Not possible," Thomas said seriously. "I already know you snore slightly when you sleep, that you talk to yourself when you are cooking, and that you cry at anything even slightly sentimental. I have watched you for months, and I love everything I have seen. I want to build a life with you, Laura. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to make you happy and give you all those dreams you thought you had lost." "I do not snore," Laura protested weakly, but she was smiling through her tears. "You absolutely do," Thomas said, pulling her closer. "It is adorable." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Laura leaned against Thomas's shoulder, feeling a contentment she had never known existed. She thought about the woman she had been just 6 months earlier, standing in a dirty yard in Carson City with all hope drained out of her. That woman had been certain that dreams were dangerous things, that hoping only led to heartbreak. But she had been wrong. Dreams were not the problem. It was dreaming for the wrong things about the wrong people that caused pain. This dream, this hope that was building between her and Thomas, felt solid and real and possible. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked softly. "About dreams," Laura said. "About how I thought I had given up on them forever, and about how you gave me new ones worth chasing." "We will chase them together," Thomas promised. "Every single one." Over the next months, Laura and Thomas's courtship became the worst-kept secret on the ranch. The hands teased Thomas mercilessly, but it was good-natured ribbing that spoke to their approval. Laura found herself the recipient of shy smiles from the younger cowboys and knowing looks from the older ones. Even Mr. Sinclair, a man of few words, had gruffly told Thomas that he was a lucky man. Thomas continued working as a ranch hand, but he was saving his wages with fierce determination. He had found a piece of land about 20 miles north, a small valley with good water and grazing. It was not much, just 160 acres, but it was available for homesteading. He talked about it constantly, his eyes lighting up as he described his plans. "We will start small," he said one evening as they walked together. "Just a few head of cattle and some horses. Build a small house, nothing fancy at first but solid and weatherproof. Plant a kitchen garden for you. Maybe get some chickens." "That sounds wonderful," Laura said, and she meant it. She did not need fancy things or a big house. She just wanted a home that was theirs, built on honesty and hard work and genuine affection. "I have been thinking," Thomas said, stopping and turning to face her. "I've got enough saved now to file the homestead claim and start building. Come spring, we could have a cabin up and be ready to start working the land. That is, if you are still willing to take a chance on me." "What are you asking, Thomas?" Thomas took both her hands in his expression serious. "I am asking you to marry me, Laura. I know we have not been courting that long by traditional standards, but I am not getting any younger and I am sure about what I want. I want you. I want to build a life together, chase those dreams we talked about. Will you marry me?" Laura felt joy bubbling up inside her, pure and uncomplicated. "Yes," she said, laughing. "Yes, absolutely yes." Thomas pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, not caring who might see. They were married in February of 1879, in a small ceremony at the ranch with Ruth and William Sinclair standing as witnesses. Laura wore a new dress that Ruth had helped her make, simple blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Thomas wore his best shirt and pants, his hair slicked back and his face shining with happiness. The ranch hands had pooled their money to buy them a set of cooking pots and a good rifle. Ruth gave them a quilt she had made herself, beautiful and warm. Even Mr. Sinclair had contributed a young cow and her calf to help start their herd. After the ceremony, there was a modest celebration with food and music. Laura danced with Thomas under the stars, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. This was so different from her first wedding, which had been a hurried affair in a justice's office with Raymond already half drunk. This felt real and solid and full of promise. When the celebration ended, Thomas helped Laura into their wagon, loaded with their combined possessions and the gifts they had received. They drove through the night to reach their land, arriving at dawn to see their future spread out before them in the golden morning light. Thomas had already started building their cabin, and the basic structure was up. It was small, just 3 rooms, but it had a good stone fireplace and real glass windows. Over the next weeks, they worked together to finish it, Laura helping where she could and cooking meals over the campfire while Thomas hammered and sawed. Their first night in the completed cabin, they lay together in their bed, listening to the wind whistle around the corners and the settling sounds of new wood. "Are you happy?" Thomas asked, pulling Laura closer. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Laura said honestly. "Sometimes I wake up and think this must be a dream, that I will open my eyes and be back in Carson City in that awful house." "Not a dream," Thomas said, kissing her forehead. "This is real and it is ours. We built this together and we are going to build so much more." And they did. Over the next years, Thomas and Laura Yates built a life that exceeded both their dreams. They worked from dawn to dusk, gradually expanding their herd, improving their land, and making their cabin into a real home. It was hard work, filled with challenges and setbacks. There were harsh winters when they worried about the cattle, dry summers when the creek ran low, and moments when Laura wondered if they would make it. But through it all, they had each other. When Laura felt discouraged, Thomas reminded her how far they had come. When Thomas pushed himself too hard, Laura made him rest and laugh. They were partners in the truest sense, building something together that neither could have achieved alone. In the spring of 1880, Laura discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling tired and queasy for weeks before she finally accepted what her body was telling her. When she told Thomas, his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he said wonderingly, his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Laura asked, suddenly nervous. "I know we are still getting established and this will make things harder." "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Thomas said. "Laura, you are giving me everything I ever wanted, a home, a family, a future worth fighting for." How could I be anything but thrilled? Their son was born in December, a healthy baby boy with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him Daniel Thomas Yates, and he was perfect in every way. Laura had been terrified during her pregnancy, afraid something would go wrong, but the birth was relatively easy, and Daniel took to nursing immediately. Thomas was a natural father, patient and gentle with the baby. Laura would often find him just holding Daniel, talking to him softly about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together when he was bigger. Watching them together, Laura felt a completion she had not known was possible. Over the next years, 2 more children joined their family. Emma came in 1882, a red-faced, loud baby who grew into a fearless little girl. Then in 1884, another son they named Matthew. The cabin that had seemed spacious for 2 adults now bulged with life and noise and love. Laura sometimes thought about the woman she had been in Carson City, convinced that her life was over, that she had nothing to hope for or dream about. That woman would not recognize the Laura who now chased giggling children through a vegetable garden, who worked alongside her husband to build something lasting, who went to bed each night exhausted but satisfied. The ranch grew too. By 1885, they had a substantial herd and had built a proper barn and additional corrals. They hired occasional help during busy seasons, and Thomas's reputation for quality horses began to spread. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure in ways that mattered. One evening in the summer of 1886, after the children were in bed, Thomas and Laura sat on the porch of their now expanded house and looked out over the land they had built together. It had been 8 years since that day Thomas had ridden up to her door in Carson City, offering her a chance she had been terrified to take. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Laura asked, leaning against Thomas's shoulder. "If you had not come by that day, if I had not decided to leave with you." "I try not to," Thomas admitted. "It scares me to think how close we came to missing each other completely. If I had ridden by your house 10 minutes earlier or later, if you had decided to stay in Carson City, if any of 100 small things had been different." "I would still be there," Laura said quietly. "Probably dead by now, honestly, or wishing I was." Thomas tightened his arm around her. "But you are not. You are here with me, with our children, living the life we built together. That is what matters." "You saved me," Laura said simply. "You gave me back my life." "No," Thomas said firmly. "You saved yourself, Laura. You made the choice to leave, to take a chance on something unknown. You did the hard work of building this life alongside me. You survived things that would have broken most people and came out stronger. I just happened to be there at the right time to offer you a hand." Laura turned to look at her husband, this man who had given her so much more than she had ever thought to ask for. His face was weathered now from years of outdoor work, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. But to her, he was the most handsome man she had ever known. "We saved each other," she said finally. "I think that is the truth of it. We were both looking for something, even if we did not know what it was, and somehow we found it in each other." "I will take that," Thomas said, kissing her softly. "That is a good story to tell our grandchildren someday." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. In the distance, a coyote howled, and from the barn came the soft sounds of horses settling in for the night. Inside the house, their children slept safely, dreaming whatever dreams children dream. Laura thought about dreams then, about how she had given up on them and how Thomas had helped her find new ones. But more than that, she thought about how they had chased those dreams together, building something real and lasting out of hope and hard work. Some dreams, she realized, were not meant to be chased alone. The best ones, the ones worth having, were the dreams you built with someone else, brick by brick and day by day. As the years continued to pass, the Yates ranch became a landmark in the valley. Thomas's horses were sought after throughout Nevada and into California, known for their intelligence and steady temperament. Laura had developed a reputation of her own for her medicinal herbs and her willingness to help neighbors in need. Their home became a gathering place where people knew they would find a warm welcome and honest dealing. Daniel grew into a tall, serious boy who loved working with the horses as much as his father did. By the time he was 12, he could break a green horse better than most grown men. Emma proved to have her mother's head for numbers and her father's way with animals, an unusual combination that made her invaluable around the ranch. Matthew was still young, but he showed signs of being the most adventurous of the three, always exploring and asking questions about everything. In 1888, tragedy struck when a summer fever swept through the valley. Several families lost children, and Laura worked herself to exhaustion nursing the sick. When Emma came down with the fever, Laura and Thomas spent 3 terrifying days at her bedside, trading off so one of them could watch over her constantly. When the fever finally broke and Emma opened her eyes asking for water, Laura collapsed in Thomas's arms and cried for the first time since the illness began. The fear of losing their daughter had brought back all the old terrors, the reminder that happiness was fragile and could be snatched away without warning. "She is going to be all right," Thomas kept saying, holding Laura while she shook. "She is strong, just like her mother. She is going to be fine." Emma did recover, though it took weeks before she regained her full strength. Laura watched over her with fierce protectiveness, grateful beyond words that they had been spared. The experience reminded her not to take anything for granted, to treasure each ordinary day. One afternoon in the fall of 1889, Laura was working in her garden when she saw a wagon approaching. She did not recognize it at first, but as it drew closer, her heart began to pound. The woman driving looked familiar in a way that made Laura's breath catch. "Margaret," she called out uncertainly. The woman pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, and Laura saw that it was indeed her sister, though Margaret was older and more careworn than Laura remembered. They stared at each other for a long moment before Margaret spoke. "Hello, Laura. It has been a while." 11 years, Laura said, hardly believing her sister was standing in front of her. "How did you find me?" "I heard about a woman named Laura Yates who ran a ranch up in Washoe Valley with her husband. I hoped it might be you." Margaret looked around at the well-maintained ranch, the house, the children playing in the yard. "You have done well for yourself." Laura felt old resentment warring with the joy of seeing her sister again. They had not parted on good terms, and Margaret's letters had stopped years ago. But looking at her sister now, seeing the exhaustion in her face and the worn state of her clothes, Laura felt more pity than anger. "Come inside," she said. "You must be tired from your journey." Over coffee, Margaret explained that she had left Missouri after their aunt died, traveling west with a man who had abandoned her in Sacramento. She had been working various jobs, trying to save enough to go back home or start over somewhere new. She had heard Laura's name mentioned by a traveling merchant and had come hoping to find her sister, not knowing what kind of reception she would receive. "I know I was not kind to you when you left with Raymond," Margaret said quietly. "I was jealous, if I am being honest. You were getting away, even if it was with a man none of us trusted, and I was stuck there with Aunt Helen. I said things I should not have said." "That was a long time ago," Laura said. "We were both different people then." "You certainly are," Margaret said, looking at Laura with something like wonder. "You look happy, Laura, really happy." "I do not think I ever saw you look that way back home," Laura smiled. "I am happy. I've got a good husband, beautiful children, and work that matters. It took me a while to get here, and the road was not easy, but I would not change any of it now." Thomas came in from the barn then, stopping when he saw they had a visitor. Laura made introductions, watching as Thomas extended his hand with his usual courtesy. "Any family of Laura's is welcome here," he said simply. "Will you be staying for supper?" Margaret stayed for more than supper. She stayed for 3 weeks, helping around the ranch and getting to know her nieces and nephew. Laura watched her sister slowly relax, the tightness around her eyes easing as she settled into the rhythm of ranch life. They talked about their childhood, about their parents, about the years they had spent apart. It was healing in ways Laura had not expected. When Margaret finally prepared to leave, heading to a job she had secured in Virginia City, she hugged Laura tightly. "Thank you," she said, "for taking me in, for not holding grudges, for showing me what is possible when you do not give up." "Write to me this time," Laura said. "Real letters, not just once and then nothing. We have lost enough years." "I will," Margaret promised. "And Laura, I am glad you found him, your Thomas. He is a good man." "The best," Laura agreed. As she watched her sister's wagon disappear down the road, Laura felt Thomas come up behind her, his arms circling her waist. "You all right?" he asked. "Better than all right," Laura said, leaning back against him. "I got my sister back. I did not realize how much I needed that until it happened." "You are good at that," Thomas observed. healing things that seemed broken beyond repair. Laura turned in his arms to face him. "We are good at it. You started the healing, Thomas. You showed me it was possible." The 1890s brought continued growth and prosperity. Daniel, now a young man of 18, had become invaluable to the ranch operation. He had inherited his father's skill with horses and his mother's steady temperament. Several neighboring ranchers had already approached Thomas about having Daniel work for them, but the boy seemed content to stay and help build the family operation. Emma, at 15, had become a beautiful and capable young woman who could work a full day alongside the ranch hands when needed, but also had a gift for keeping the household accounts and managing supplies. She had started corresponding with a young man from Virginia City, the son of a merchant, and Laura could see the beginning of a courtship developing. Matthew, at 13, was still finding his way, but he showed promise as a natural leader. The other children in the valley gravitated toward him, and he had a gift for organizing games and adventures that kept them entertained and mostly out of trouble. One evening in 1895, as Laura sat on the porch mending a torn shirt, she realized with a start that she was 41 years old. Somehow, the years had slipped by while she was busy living them. Her hair had threads of gray now, and her hands bore the marks of hard work, but she felt more vital, more alive than she had at 24. Thomas came and sat beside her, moving with the slight stiffness that came from a day's hard work at age 43. They were not young anymore, but they had aged together, earning every line and scar. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, a question that had become a comfortable ritual between them. "About getting old," Laura said with a smile. "About how I used to think my life was over at 24, and here I am at 41 feeling like it is just getting good." "You are not old," Thomas protested. "You are exactly perfect. You have to say that. You are my husband." "I do not have to say anything," Thomas countered. "I choose to say it because it is true. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever known, Laura Yates." "You were beautiful when I first saw you looking so sad in Carson City, and you are beautiful now looking so happy on our porch. You will be beautiful when we are both gray and creaky and sitting in rocking chairs telling stories to our grandchildren." Laura set down her mending and took his hand. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying a widow with nothing but a carpet bag and a pile of debts. You could have had someone younger, someone without so much history." Thomas brought her hand to his lips, a gesture that had become as familiar as breathing over their years together. "Not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Laura. You and the life we built together. I would not change a moment of it." They sat together as the sun set, painting the Nevada sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, they could hear Daniel calling the horses in from pasture and Emma singing as she hung laundry. Matthew's laughter drifted from somewhere near the barn. This was the dream, Laura thought. Not the fairy tale version she had imagined as a girl, with castles and princes and magic. The real dream, built on hard work and genuine love and the daily choice to show up for each other. The dream of mattering, of building something lasting, of loving and being loved in return. Thomas had not given her this dream. He had given her the chance to find it, the courage to chase it, and the partnership to make it real. But she had done the work too, had chosen to believe that something better was possible, had taken the terrifying step of leaving everything familiar to pursue an uncertain future. In 1898, Emma married her merchant son in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch. The valley turned out in force, dozens of families who had become friends over the years. Laura watched her daughter pledge her life to a young man who clearly adored her, and she felt a satisfaction so deep, it was almost painful. Emma would have the kind of marriage Laura had built with Thomas, based on respect and partnership and genuine affection. Daniel had started courting a rancher's daughter from across the valley, a smart, capable young woman named Sarah who could rope a steer and cook a perfect pie. Laura liked her immediately and could already see the wedding that would inevitably follow. Matthew, now 16, had announced his intention to study veterinary medicine, wanting to bring modern animal care to the Nevada ranches. It would require him to travel to California for schooling, which terrified Laura, but Thomas encouraged it. "Let him go," Thomas said when Laura expressed her fears. "We raised him to think for himself and chase his dreams. We cannot hold him back now because we will miss him." Laura knew he was right, but it was hard. She had spent so many years building this family, creating this home, that the thought of it changing felt like a small death. But change was part of life, she knew. Children grew up and made their own way. That was how it was supposed to be. One night in late 1899, Laura woke from a dream she could not quite remember. She lay in the darkness, listening to Thomas's steady breathing beside her, feeling grateful for this simple moment of peace. 21 years ago, she had been sleeping beside a man she feared and despised, trapped in a life she could not escape. Now she lay beside her best friend, her partner, her love. She thought about all the moments that had led her here. Raymond's death, which she still could not quite feel sorry about. Thomas riding up to her door in Carson City, offering a job she had been too desperate to refuse. The journey to Washoe Valley, each mile taking her further from the woman she had been. The first night in their cabin, building a life from almost nothing. She thought about the births of her children, each one a miracle that terrified and awed her. The long days of work, the seasons passing, the slow, steady accumulation of years that had transformed into a life worth living. The laughter and the tears, the successes and the failures, all of it woven together into something meaningful. "Cannot sleep," Thomas murmured, pulling her closer. "Just thinking," Laura said, "about how lucky I am." "We are lucky," Thomas corrected. "Both of us. We found each other when we needed it most." "I love you," Laura said, simple words she never tired of speaking. "I love you too," Thomas replied. "Every single day more than the day before." As the new century dawned in 1900, the Yates Ranch stood as a testament to what two determined people could build together. The original small cabin had been expanded and improved over the years, becoming a comfortable home filled with memories. The land they had homesteaded had grown to include additional acreage purchased with the profits from their hard work. Their children were launched or launching, becoming the kind of capable, decent people who would contribute something good to the world. Laura sometimes took long walks around the ranch, marveling at everything they had created. The barn that housed Thomas's prized horses, the vegetable garden that fed them through the winter, the pastures where their cattle grazed, the hen house that provided eggs and the occasional Sunday dinner. Every inch of it represented hours of labor, months of planning, years of dedication. But more than the physical property, Laura was proud of the less tangible things they had built. A marriage based on mutual respect and genuine affection. A family that loved and supported each other. A reputation for fairness and integrity. A home where neighbors knew they would find help if they needed it. In the spring of 1902, Daniel married his Sarah in a quiet ceremony at her family's ranch. Laura watched her eldest son pledge his life to his bride, and she saw Thomas in him, the same steady reliability and quiet strength. It gave her deep satisfaction to know that the good they had built was continuing into the next generation. Emma had given them their first grandchild the previous year, a baby girl named Ruth after Ruth Sinclair, who had passed away in 1900. Laura had wept when Emma told her the name. remembering the stern but kind woman who had given her a chance when she desperately needed one. Holding baby Ruth, Laura felt the circle completing. She was now the grandmother, the one passing on wisdom and love to a new generation. It was a role she embraced fully, determined to show this little girl the same fierce love and support she tried to show her own children. Matthew had gone off to his veterinary studies in California, writing long letters home about his classes and the wonders of San Francisco. His absence left a hole in the household, but Laura took comfort in knowing he was pursuing his dreams, building a life that would fulfill him. One evening in the summer of 1903, Thomas came to find Laura in her garden. She was picking tomatoes, her apron already heavy with the ripe fruit. At 49, she moved a bit slower than she once had, but she was still strong and capable. Thomas, at 51, had more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes, but he was still the handsomest man she had ever known. "Come with me," he said, taking her hand. "I want to show you something." Curious, Laura set down her basket and followed him. He led her to the top of the hill that overlooked their ranch and the valley beyond. The sun was beginning to set, painting everything in golden light. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Thomas asked, his arm around her shoulders. Laura did remember. It had been 25 years ago, in the darkness before dawn, when their cabin had been barely more than a skeleton of timbers and their future had been entirely uncertain. "I remember," she said. "I was terrified. I had no idea if we would make it, if any of this would work." "But you trusted me enough to try," Thomas said. "You took that leap of faith with me, even though you had every reason to be scared." "Best decision I ever made," Laura said simply. Thomas turned to face her, taking both her hands. "I brought you up here because I wanted you to see what we built. Not just the ranch, though that is impressive enough, but look at all of it, Laura. Our home, our children, our life. We did this together. Two people who started with nothing but hope and determination, and look what we made." Laura looked out over the valley, seeing it all with new eyes. The ranch buildings they had constructed with their own hands, the garden she had planted and tended, the fences they had mended countless times, the land they had improved and protected, and beyond that, the less visible but equally important things. The love they shared, the family they had raised, the community they had become part of. "I was thinking," Thomas continued, "about how you used to say you had given up on dreams, about how you thought your life was over at 24. And I wanted to remind you of all the dreams we made come true together." "You gave me those dreams," Laura said, her voice thick with emotion. "No," Thomas said firmly. "We found them together. I gave you a chance, maybe, but you did the hard work of believing again, of hoping again, of building again. These are our dreams, Laura, ones we chased together." Laura leaned against her husband, looking out at the life they had built. He was right. These dreams were not his gift to her or hers to him. They were something they had created together, brick by brick and day by day. Dreams of home and family and purpose. Dreams of being loved and being worthy of love. Dreams of building something that would outlast them. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself. For giving me a life worth living." "Thank you," Thomas replied, "for taking a chance on a wandering cowboy with more dreams than sense. For working alongside me to build this. For giving me children and a home and more happiness than any one man deserves. For being my partner in everything." They stood together on that hilltop, watching the sun set on another day of their life together. Below them, Daniel was closing up the barn for the night. In the house, Emma was probably getting little Ruth ready for bed. Matthew's latest letter sat on the kitchen table, full of enthusiasm and plans. The life they had built continued, growing and changing but always rooted in the foundation they had laid together. Laura thought about the woman she had been, standing in a shabby yard in Carson City, convinced that hope was dangerous and dreams were for fools. If she could speak to that woman now, what would she say? That life could change in an instant if you were brave enough to let it. That the end of one story could be the beginning of a better one. That giving up on dreams was the only real failure. But that woman was gone, transformed by years of hard work and genuine love into someone stronger and happier than she had ever imagined possible. The transformation had not been easy or quick. It had taken years of daily choosing to hope, to try to believe. But it had been worth every difficult moment. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, the familiar question making her smile. "About dreams," Laura said. "About how I thought I had given up on them forever, about how you helped me find new ones worth chasing, and about how we chased them together every step of the way." "We made a good team," Thomas observed. "The best," Laura agreed. "We still are." They walked back down to the house hand in hand, the same way they had walked through 25 years of marriage. As partners, as friends, as two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful from the ruins of what had come before. In the years that followed, the pattern continued. More grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and laughter. Matthew returned from California with his veterinary degree and set up practice in the valley, quickly becoming indispensable to the ranching community. Daniel and Sarah expanded their own ranch, while Emma and her husband built a successful mercantile business in Virginia City. Laura and Thomas grew older together, their bodies slowing but their partnership as strong as ever. They worked the ranch with help from Daniel and hired hands, adjusting their routine to match their aging bodies, but never giving up the work they loved. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Neighbors and friends came from miles around to honor the couple who had become fixtures of the valley. There were speeches and toasts, food and music and laughter. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had gone home, Laura and Thomas found themselves alone on the porch. The summer night was warm and clear, filled with stars. 30 years, Laura marveled. "How did that happen?" "One day at a time," Thomas said. "Same way we did everything else." Laura thought about all those days, thousands of them now, each one adding to the sum of their life together. There had been hard days, certainly, days when money was tight or illness struck, or the weather destroyed their plans. But there had been so many more good days, ordinary days filled with simple satisfactions and quiet joy. "If you could go back," Thomas asked suddenly, "back to that day in Carson City when I first showed up, knowing everything you know now, would you do it all the same?" "Without hesitation," Laura said immediately. "Every single choice, every hard moment, every uncertainty, it all led here to this life, to you, to us. I would not change a thing." "Me neither," Thomas said. "Best decision I ever made was stopping at that house and offering you a job." "Best decision you ever made was saying yes." Laura smiled in the darkness. "Actually, the best decision I made was saying yes when you asked me to marry you. The job was just the beginning." They sat in companionable silence, the kind of silence that comes from decades of knowing each other so well that words are often unnecessary. Laura felt a deep contentment settle over her, a sense of completion and rightness that she had never experienced in her youth. She thought about the girl she had been, dreaming of adventure and romance while reading books by candlelight. Those dreams had seemed foolish when she married Raymond, naive fantasies that bore no resemblance to the harsh realities of adult life. But maybe she had not been wrong to dream, just wrong about what those dreams should look like, Real romance, she had learned, was not grand gestures and passionate declarations. It was Thomas bringing her coffee every morning for 30 years. It was the way he still held her hand when they walked together. It was how he had sat with her through 3 difficult labors and countless nights of sick children, never complaining, always present. Real adventure was not exotic travels to distant lands. It was building a life from nothing, facing down challenges and uncertainties, creating something lasting against all odds. It was the daily courage required to keep hoping and trying and loving even when things got hard. In 1912, tragedy struck when Thomas suffered a heart attack while working in the barn. Laura found him collapsed in the hay, his face gray and his breathing shallow. Terror such as she had never known gripped her as she screamed for Daniel and sent Matthew racing for the doctor. For 3 days, Thomas hovered between life and death while Laura sat beside his bed, holding his hand and willing him to fight. The doctor was not optimistic, saying Thomas's heart had been badly damaged and recovery would be difficult if it happened at all. But Thomas was stubborn and Laura was relentless. She nursed him with fierce dedication, feeding him broth and medicine, talking to him constantly even when he could not respond, refusing to accept that their story might end this way. Slowly, impossibly, he began to improve. Recovery was long and frustrating. Thomas, who had never been sick a day in his life, chafed at the forced inactivity. He wanted to be up and working, despite the doctor's stern warnings that he needed to take it easy. Laura had to enforce rest periods and limited activity, which sometimes led to arguments. "I am not an invalid," Thomas protested one afternoon when Laura refused to let him help with the horses. "No, you are a 58-year-old man who had a heart attack," Laura countered. "And you are going to take care of yourself if I have to tie you to that chair." "You are enjoying this," Thomas accused, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. "Maybe a little," Laura admitted. "It is not often I get to boss you around." "You boss me around all the time," Thomas said. "I just usually let you think it was my idea." Laura laughed, relief flooding through her. If he could joke, if he could smile, then he was going to be all right. They had survived this crisis like they had survived everything else together. Thomas did recover, though he never regained his full strength. He had to hand over the heaviest ranch work to Daniel and the hired hands, accepting a more supervisory role that frustrated him at first. But gradually, he found satisfaction in other things. He spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them about horses and ranching. He tinkered with improvements to equipment and buildings, and he sat with Laura in the evenings, just being together. "I used to measure my worth by how much work I could do in a day," Thomas admitted one night. "Now I cannot do half of what I used to, and it makes me feel useless." "You are not useless," Laura said firmly. "You are the heart of this family, Thomas. You are what holds us all together. That has nothing to do with how many fence posts you can sink or how long you can work without resting." "How did I get so lucky as to end up with you?" Thomas wondered, pulling her close. "We both got lucky," Laura said. "We found each other when we needed it most, and we built something beautiful together. That luck had nothing to do with chance and everything to do with choice. We chose each other, every day for 33 years. That is not luck. That is love." In 1915, the world seemed to be coming apart with war in Europe, but the Yates ranch remained a haven of peace and continuity. Laura, now 61, had slowed down considerably, but she still managed the household and helped with the grandchildren who were always underfoot. Thomas, at 63 and still recovering from his heart attack, spent his days doing lighter work and dispensing advice to anyone who would listen. They celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them having dinner by candlelight in the kitchen where Laura had cooked thousands of meals. Their children had offered to throw another party, but Laura and Thomas preferred this simple intimacy. "Do you remember our wedding night?" Thomas asked over dessert. "I remember being terrified," Laura said with a smile. "I had no idea what I was doing, being married to someone I actually liked." "We figured it out," Thomas said. "We did," Laura agreed. "We figured out a lot of things together." She looked across the table at her husband, seeing the young cowboy he had been beneath the gray hair and weathered skin. She saw all their years together written in the lines of his face, in the familiar gestures of his hands, in the loving warmth of his eyes. This was what lasting love looked like, she thought. Not the burning passion of youth, though they had shared plenty of that in their earlier years, but something deeper and more enduring. This was the love of two people who had weathered storms together and come through stronger. The love of shared memories, and inside jokes and comfortable silences. The love of knowing someone so thoroughly that you could finish their sentences and anticipate their needs. The love of choosing each other over and over, year after year, through good times and hard times and everything in between. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, and Laura smiled at the question that had become a beloved ritual. "About love," she said. "About dreams. About how I thought both were beyond my reach, and then you came along and proved me wrong." "We proved each other wrong," Thomas said. "I had stopped believing in finding a partner who understood me, who wanted the same things I wanted. Then there you were, looking so lost and so strong all at the same time." "We saved each other," Laura said, not for the first time. "We did," Thomas agreed. "Best rescue operation ever." As 1916 arrived, Laura and Thomas settled into a comfortable routine suited to their aging bodies. They still rose early but moved slower, taking time to appreciate small pleasures. Coffee on the porch at sunrise. Evening walks around the ranch when the weather permitted. Long conversations about their children and grandchildren. Reading aloud to each other from books and newspapers. The ranch continued to thrive under Daniel's capable management. Sarah had proven to be an excellent partner for him, much like Laura had been for Thomas. They were raising their own children on the land now, the third generation of Yates to call this place home. Emma's oldest child, Ruth, now a young woman of 15, had started spending summers at the ranch. She reminded Laura so much of herself at that age, full of dreams and questions about the world. Laura took special pleasure in talking with her, encouraging her ambitions and telling her stories about the old days. "Grandmother," Ruth asked one afternoon as they worked in the garden together, "were you ever scared? When you left Carson City and came here with grandfather?" Laura considered the question carefully. "Terrified," she admitted. "I was leaving everything familiar, going off with a man I barely knew to a place I had never seen. If I had thought about it too much, I probably would have talked myself out of it." "Then why did you do it?" Ruth wanted to know. "Because staying scared me more," Laura said simply. "I looked at what my life was in Carson City, what it would become if I stayed, and that future terrified me more than any unknown. So I chose to be brave, even though I did not feel brave, and it turned out to be the best decision I ever made." Ruth was quiet for a moment, digesting this. "I want to be brave like that someday." "You already are," Laura assured her. "Bravery is not about not being scared. It is about being scared and doing the thing anyway. And you, my dear girl, have plenty of that kind of courage in you." That summer, Thomas's health took another turn. He developed a persistent cough that would not go away no matter what remedies they tried. The doctor came and went, his expression growing more somber with each visit. Finally, he took Laura aside and told her what she had already guessed. Thomas's heart was failing, and there was nothing more to be done, except keep him comfortable. Laura received this news with outward calm, thanking the doctor and showing him out. But once she was alone, she allowed herself to cry, great heaving sobs of grief for what was coming. She had known this day would arrive eventually. They were both getting old, and people did not live forever, but knowing it intellectually and facing it emotionally were two very different things. That evening she sat with Thomas on the porch, watching the sun set over the valley they had made their home. She had not told him what the doctor said, but he seemed to know anyway. "Laura," he said quietly, taking her hand, "we need to talk about what comes next." "I do not want to talk about it," Laura said, her voice breaking. "I know, love, but we have to." Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "I want you to know that I am not afraid. I have had a good life, a better life than I ever imagined possible, and that is because of you." "Do not," Laura said. "Do not say goodbye, not yet." "Not goodbye," Thomas said. "Never goodbye, but I want to make sure you know how grateful I am. For every day, every moment, every single second we had together. You made me happier than any man has a right to be." Laura leaned against his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. "What will I do without you? You will keep living," Thomas said firmly. "You will watch our grandchildren grow up and our great-grandchildren be born. You will tend your garden and tell our stories and be the heart of this family. You will do all the things you did before, except I will not be there to see them. But I will be proud of you anyway, wherever I am." They sat together until the stars came out, holding each other in the gathering darkness. Laura memorized the feeling of his arms around her, the sound of his breathing, the warmth of his presence. She tried to store up enough of him to last through all the years ahead, when he would be just a memory. Thomas passed away on a September morning in 1916, sitting in his favorite chair on the porch with Laura beside him. One moment he was there, smiling at her and squeezing her hand. The next, he was gone, slipping away so peacefully that Laura almost did not realize it had happened. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over Nevada to pay their respects. Thomas Yates had been respected and loved, known for his fairness and integrity. Person after person told Laura what her husband had meant to them, how he had helped them or taught them, or simply treated them with kindness when they needed it. Laura listened to it all with a strange sense of distance, as if this were happening to someone else. Thomas was gone. Her partner of 37 years, the man who had saved her and loved her and built a life with her, was gone. The world felt fundamentally wrong without him in it. In the days and weeks that followed, Laura moved through her routine mechanically. She cooked and cleaned and tended her garden, but none of it held any meaning. She felt hollowed out, a shell going through the motions of living without really being alive. Her children worried about her. They took turns staying at the ranch, making sure she was eating and sleeping and not spending all her time sitting in Thomas's chair staring at nothing. But Laura could not seem to find her way back to the world of the living. Without Thomas, everything felt pointless. One afternoon, about 2 months after Thomas's death, Laura found herself walking to the hilltop where they had stood so many times together. She sat down in the grass and looked out over the ranch, seeing it through eyes blurred with tears. "I do not know how to do this without you," she said aloud, talking to Thomas as if he could hear her. "You told me to keep living, but I do not remember how. Everything reminds me of you. Everything hurts." The wind picked up, rustling through the grass, and Laura felt something shift inside her. She remembered Thomas telling her that she had saved herself, that she was stronger than she knew. She remembered all the times she had thought she could not go on, and how she had done it anyway. She remembered that she was Laura Thompson Yates, survivor of Raymond's cruelty and builder of dreams, and she was stronger than this grief. "All right," she said to the wind, to Thomas, to herself. "All right, I will keep going, for our children and grandchildren, for everything we built together. For you, it was not easy. Some days the grief was so overwhelming that Laura could barely get out of bed, but she did get up every single day and she did what needed doing. Gradually, imperceptibly, it got a little easier. The sharp edges of her loss dulled into a constant ache that she learned to carry with her. She found comfort in her grandchildren, especially young Ruth, who reminded her so much of herself. She found purpose in maintaining the ranch that she and Thomas had built, making sure his legacy continued. She found peace in her garden, where she could still feel Thomas's presence in the flowers he had helped her plant and the vegetables they had grown together. In 1918, as the war finally ended and the world began to heal, Laura celebrated her 64th birthday surrounded by her family. 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter. As she looked around at all of them, Laura felt Thomas's presence so strongly it was almost like he was there beside her. This was his legacy, she realized. Not just the ranch or the horses or the land, but this family they had created together. These children and grandchildren who carried forward the values they had instilled, who knew how to work hard and love deeply and chase dreams worth having. This was what they had built together, and it would continue long after both of them were gone. "Are you all right, grandmother?" Ruth asked, noticing the tears on Laura's cheeks. "I am fine, dear," Laura said, wiping her eyes. "Just thinking about your grandfather and how proud he would be of all of you." "Tell us a story about grandfather," one of the younger grandchildren begged. "Tell us about when you first met." Laura smiled, settling back in her chair. This was something she could do, something that kept Thomas alive in a way. She could tell their stories, pass on their history, make sure future generations knew about the man who had changed her life. "Well," she began, "it was 1878 in Carson City, Nevada, and I was the saddest, most hopeless woman you ever saw. I had given up on dreams, you see. I thought my life was over at 24 years old. And then one day, a cowboy came riding up to my door." As she told the story she had told many times before, Laura felt the familiar pain of Thomas's absence ease just slightly. He was gone, yes, but he was also here in every memory, every lesson, every value she passed on to their descendants. Their love story had not ended with his death. It continued in the lives they had touched and the family they had created. The years continued to pass. Laura grew older but remained active, tending her garden and her grandchildren with equal dedication. She became the matriarch of the family, the keeper of stories and traditions, the source of wisdom and love for multiple generations. In 1925, at age 71, Laura was diagnosed with pneumonia. She fought it as she had fought everything in her life, with determination and stubbornness. But her body was tired, worn out from decades of hard work and heartbreak and healing. The doctor warned her children that recovery was unlikely at her age. Laura knew she was dying, and she was not afraid. She had lived a full life, loved deeply and been loved in return. She had built something meaningful and lasting. She was ready to rest. On a spring morning, with the scent of flowers drifting through the open window and her children gathered around her bed, Laura Thompson Yates took her last breath. Her final words were, "Tell Thomas I am coming," and there was a smile on her face. They buried her next to Thomas on the hill overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read Laura Thompson Yates, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, dreamer. At her funeral, Ruth stood and spoke about her grandmother's life, about the courage it took to start over, about the love that had built a legacy. "My grandmother used to say she had given up on dreams," Ruth told the assembled crowd. She thought her life was over before it really began. But then she met my grandfather, and together they found new dreams worth chasing. They built this ranch with their own hands, raised a family with love and dedication, and showed all of us what real partnership looks like. They taught us that it is never too late to start over, never too late to hope, never too late to love. The Yates Ranch continued for generations, passing from Daniel to his children and grandchildren. The original cabin where Thomas and Laura had started their life together was preserved as a reminder of where it all began. The hilltop where they used to sit became a family gathering place, where descendants would go to remember and reflect. Laura and Thomas's love story became a treasured family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The details might have varied slightly with each telling, but the essential truth remained the same. Two people who had every reason to give up on happiness had found each other instead. They had taken their broken pieces and built something whole and beautiful together. They had chased dreams worth having and built a life worth living. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy they left behind. Not the land or the buildings or even the family name, but the example of what was possible when two people chose love, chose hope, chose to believe that better days were ahead if they were brave enough to reach for them. Their story proved that giving up on dreams was never the answer. Sometimes you just needed to find new dreams, better dreams, dreams worth chasing together. And when you found the right person to chase them with, anything was possible.